The Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP, is a protocol for transferring hypermedia documents such as HTML or XML. It was originally designed for communication between web browsers and web servers, but can also be used for other purposes such as server-to-server communication. It follows a classic client-server model, with a client opening a connection to make a request and waiting until it receives a response from the server. It's also important to note that HTTP is a stateless protocol, which means that no data will be kept by the server between two requests, which implies that every request must contain all the necessary information to be processed at once by the server. A typical HTTP session consists of three phases. First, the client initiates a connection in the underlying transport layer, usually TCP, using an URL and a port number. The client then sends its request and waits for the answer. And finally, the server processes the request and sends back its answer, providing a status code and the appropriate data. An HTTP request is a message sent by a client to a named host in order to access a resource or perform an action on the server, which contains a request line, a set of HTTP headers, and a message body if needed. The request line contains an HTTP method, also called a verb, which is a one-word command that tells the server what to do with a resource, a URI, which is the path component of the URL for the request, and the HTTP version number. The HTTP headers are composed of a name and a value and provide information about the message, the client, and the way in which the client wants to communicate with the server. For example, this header means that the client expects the server to respond with JSON data, and this one means that the message body of the request is sent in the URL encoded format. Finally, the message body is the actual content of the request, which can eventually be encoded or broken into data chunks. Note that this message body is optional, as indeed not all requests need to send data to the server, like GET requests for instance, which are designed to ask the server to send a resource and not the other way around. An HTTP response is a message sent by the server to the client in response to an HTTP request, which provides the client with the requested resource or informs it that the request actions has been carried out, or else that an error occurred while processing it. An HTTP response contains a status line, a set of HTTP headers, and a message body. The status line, similar to the request line, contains the HTTP version number, a status code, which is a 3-digit number indicating whether a request has been successfully completed or if something went wrong, and a reason phrase, which is a human-readable text that summarizes the meaning of the status code. The HTTP headers are composed of a name and a value and provide information about the response and the server that sent it. They are meant to assist the client in processing or displaying the response to a user, as well as caching it for future use. In the case of an unsuccessful request, headers can also be used to tell the client what it must do to complete its request successfully. For example, this header means that the message body of the response has the JSON format, and this one means that the server is using the Express framework. Finally, the message body is the actual content of the response, which may contain either the requested resource, some information about the status of the requested action, or in the case of an error, some additional information about the reasons for that error. So now that we've taken the time to define each concept, let's move on to the first practical lesson of this course, where we'll be building a simple API using Node's built-in HTTP module.